My husband sold my private cabin for $60,000 while I was away, using the money to throw a celebration dinner. He didn't know the property was under federal protection, or that the FBI was about to serve the final course. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The expensive roast lamb smelled like a crime scene. I stood in the doorway of the dining room, my suitcase still sitting in the hall, and watched my husband, Owen, tap his fork against a crystal glass that cost more than my first car. He did not look at me. He did not ask how the 16-hour flight from Singapore had been. He just smiled at his parents and his brother, Mason, like I was a ghost haunting my own return dinner. Actually, before we eat, I have something important to share, Owen said. His voice carried an authority I had never heard in 6 years of marriage. He paused, looking around the table at the faces of the people who had spent our entire marriage treating me like a piece of furniture they forgot to dust. Margaret was draped in her signature pearls, her eyes shining with anticipation. Richard sat tall in his golf club blazer, nodding as if he already knew the punchline. You all know about Violet's little cabin, Owen continued, my shoulders locked. That impractical purchase she made 3 years ago. I tensed, my fingers digging into the back of the chair they had assigned to me at the far end of the table. Owen had spent 3 years calling that place a midlife crisis shack. He had refused to step foot on the 2 acres of pine forest I had bought with my own freelance money. He had let Margaret lecture me for hours about how a proper wife does not keep secrets or buy property without her husband's permission. Well, I finally did something about it, Owen announced, throwing his arms out wide. I sold it for $60,000 last month while she was overseas. The room erupted. Margaret let out a delighted gasp and clapped her manicured hands together. Richard let out a loud whistle of approval, and Mason started laughing, reaching over to slap Owen on the back. Brilliant, Owen, Richard said. Absolutely brilliant business instinct. Taking control of a wasteful asset like that. That is what a real man does. Owen pointed a finger at the elaborate spread on the table. There were decanters of wine that I knew cost over $100 each, and catered trays from the most expensive French restaurant downtown. The money for this dinner? Owen said, his grin widening as he looked at me for the first time. It is from the cabin sale. At least one meal is covered. His family laughed at the joke. They laughed at the fact that he had stolen my sanctuary, my only place of peace, and turned it into a single night of expensive food they would forget by tomorrow morning. I stayed perfectly still. I did not scream. I did not even sit down. My phone was vibrating in my pocket, a steady, rhythmic pulse that felt like a countdown. I looked at Sarah, Mason's new girlfriend, who was sitting in the seat I usually occupied when we hosted. She was leaning toward Owen, her hand resting near his wine glass in a way that felt far too comfortable. She gave me a pitying smile. You must be so proud, Violet, Sarah said. Owen really took charge while you were gone. I met her gaze and felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. I thought about the security briefing I had attended before leaving for Singapore. I thought about Agent Patricia Yamamoto from the Defense Security Service explaining that because of my high-level security clearance, all my personal assets had been registered in federal databases. My cabin was not just a shack in the woods anymore. It was a protected asset belonging to a cleared federal contractor. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The caller ID showed a name I had never seen before. Harrison Blackwell, attorney at law. Excuse me, I said. I need to take this. Owen rolled his eyes, turning back to his father. Always working, even fresh off the plane. You should learn to relax, Violet. You do not have to worry about that cabin anymore. I walked out onto the back porch, the October air biting at my skin. I pressed the phone to my ear, and before I could even say hello, a man's voice came through, frantic and breathless. "Mrs. Whitmore? This is Harrison Blackwell. I represented the buyers in your cabin purchase. Why are the federal authorities at our office?" I looked through the glass doors. Owen was pulling a leather folder out of his bag, spreading documents across Margaret's pristine white tablecloth. He was showing them the deed. He was showing them my signature. "What are they doing, Mr. Blackwell?" I asked, watching my husband laugh as he poured more wine. "They have seized our files," Blackwell screamed. "They are talking about fraudulent transfers and restricted property sales. They are using words like forgery. They want to know where your husband is right now." I looked at Owen, who was currently demonstrating to Mason how he had practiced my handwriting. The wind outside the Whitmore estate felt like it was trying to strip the skin from my face, but the fire burning in my chest kept me warm. 6 years. I had given 6 years of my life to a man who viewed my existence as a balance sheet he could edit at will. Every morning, I had risen at dawn to prepare his coffee with 2 sugars and no cream. Every morning he had scrolled through his phone, leaving my greeting unacknowledged. "Mr. Blackwell?" I said into the phone, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a blade. "I have been in Singapore for 4 months. I did not authorize any sale." There was a long, jagged silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, God," Blackwell whispered. "He gave us everything. The deed, the title, the notarized signatures. He said you were too busy with the promotion to handle the paperwork. He said you wanted the $60,000 for a joint investment." I looked through the glass. Owen was leaning back, his chest puffed out like a peacock. He was describing the $60,000 as if he had earned it through manual labor rather than theft. My mind flashed back to the day I bought that cabin from Ruth Morrison. She had a voice like warm honey and eyes that saw through the armor I wore to survive the Whitmores. She had sold it to me for $45,000, which was $20,000 under market value, because she knew I needed the silence. The down payment on that cabin represented 3 years of skipped lunches. It was the physical manifestation of every time I had said no to a new dress or a night out, so I could have a place where Margaret could not find me. "Mr. Blackwell," I said, watching Owen pour another glass of the wine I had unwittingly paid for. "The authorities are at your office because that property is a secured federal asset. I have high-level security clearance for the Raich contract. That cabin is registered with the Defense Security Service." I heard a thud on the other end of the line, like a heavy book hitting a desk. "Federal?" Blackwell choked out. He did not mention federal status. He just said it was a vacation shack. "He did not know," I said, because he never listened. I hung up. My phone immediately buzzed again. This time it was a text from a number I had saved months ago. Agent Catherine Reeves. It read, "Mrs. Whitmore, we have flagged a suspicious title transfer on the Pine Grove property. Are you at your primary residence?" I typed back, "I'm at my mother-in-law's house, 1422 Ridgewood Drive. The subject is currently boasting about the sale to his family." Reeves replied instantly, "Stay in the house. Do not alert him. We are 10 minutes out." I tucked the phone away and stepped back into the dining room. The warmth hit me, thick with the smell of rosemary and arrogance. Owen looked up, his face flushed with wine and victory. "Everything okay at the office, honey? Or did they finally realize they can run the place without you?" Mason chuckled, his hand still resting near Sarah's. "You should be happy, Violet. Owen is going to invest that money into my new shipping venture. We could triple that $60,000 in 18 months. So," I said, finally taking my seat at the far end of the table, You sold the cabin for $60,000. You forged my signature. You took the documents from my safe, and you did it all while I was 10,000 miles away. Owen's smile did not falter, but his eyes turned hard. Forged is such a strong word. I signed for my wife. We are partners, remember? What is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. I just took the initiative you were too afraid to take. Margaret leaned forward, her pearls clacking against her glass. Honestly, Violet, you should be thanking him. That place was a drain on your time. Now the money is being used for the family. That is what a proper marriage looks like. I looked at the documents spread on the table. Owen had practiced. I could see the curve of the V in my name, the way the T crossed at a slight upward angle. He had spent days, maybe weeks, studying my journals to steal my life. I picked up a piece of the lamb. It tasted like ash. I looked at the clock on the wall. 8 minutes. Owen, I said quietly, did you read the emergency folder I left on the counter before I went to Singapore? He laughed, a loud barking sound. The 15-page manual for a shack? I used it as a coaster for a week before I tossed it in the recycling. Why? Was there a special way to sweep the porch I missed? I felt a small, cold smile touch my lips. You really should have read page 9, I said. Owen's brow furrowed. He sensed the shift in the room. The air felt heavy, like the moments before a massive summer storm. What are you talking about? I leaned back, watching the headlights of 3 black SUVs sweep across the front windows. The headlights were not moving. They stayed fixed on the house, 2 beams of white light cutting through the manicured hedges of Margaret's lawn. For a second the table went silent. Richard stood up, squinting toward the window. Who the hell is that? Mason's friends? No, I said, standing up. I think they are here for Owen. Owen let out a short, nervous laugh. For me? Did the neighbors call about the noise? He walked toward the front door, still holding his wine glass like a scepter. Margaret and Richard followed him, their faces twisted in confusion. I stayed by the table. I picked up the leather folder Owen had been so proud of and held it to my chest. The front door opened, and the sound of heavy boots on the porch echoed through the hallway. It was a rhythmic, disciplined sound. I heard the snap of a badge reel and a voice that was as cold as the October wind. Owen Whitmore? Yeah, Owen said, his voice hitching an octave. Can I help you? I walked into the hallway just as Agent Catherine Reeves stepped into the light of the foyer. She was flanked by 4 men in dark suits. They did not look like local police. They looked like the kind of people who did not care about Owen's mediocre sales numbers or Richard's golf club connections. Owen Whitmore, you are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit interstate commerce violations, Agent Reeves announced. The wine glass slipped from Owen's hand. It shattered on the marble floor, the red liquid spraying across Margaret's white silk rug. It looked exactly like blood. Arrest? Margaret shrieked, her hands flying to her throat. This is a mistake. My son is a respected businessman. He just closed a major real estate deal. That deal is exactly why we are here, ma'am, Reeves said. She did not look at Margaret. She looked at Owen. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Owen did not move. He looked like a deer caught in high beams. Violet, tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave me permission. I stepped forward, the light from the chandelier reflecting in the eyes of the agents. I looked Owen directly in the eye. I did not give you permission. I left you an emergency folder that explicitly stated the property was a secured federal asset. You told this table you threw that folder away. The metal of the handcuffs clicked. The sound was small, but it felt like the closing of a tomb. Owen let out a whimper as they pulled his arms back. This is insane. Richard roared, stepping toward the agents. You cannot just come into a private home and take a man based on the word of an emotional woman. We have lawyers. We know the chief of police. Agent Reeves finally turned to Richard. Sir, if you interfere with the federal arrest, you will be joining him. This is not a local matter. Your son sold property registered under the Defense Security Service to a buyer whose funds we are currently tracing. She turned back to Owen. Where are the documents for the Pine Grove transaction? They are on the table, I said, gesturing toward the dining room. He was just showing them off. He also admitted to practicing my signature for 3 days. Owen turned his head, his face contorted with a rage I had never seen. You bitch. You set me up. You knew this would happen. I did not set you up, Owen, I said. I just did my job. You are the one who decided my life belonged to you. The agents began to lead him out. Margaret was sobbing, clutching at the sleeve of one of the agents. You cannot take him. He is our golden boy. He has never even had a speeding ticket. The agents ignored her. They marched Owen out into the night. I watched from the porch as they shoved him into the back of the lead SUV. He looked so small through the tinted glass. He looked like the man he had always been when the family was not there to prop him up. As the SUVs began to pull away, Agent Reeves lingered for a second. Mrs. Whitmore, we will need you to come in tomorrow for a formal statement. We will also be looking into the joint account where that $60,000 was deposited. I nodded. I will be there. She looked at the house, then back at me. You might want to find a hotel for tonight. I looked back at the hallway where Richard was frantically punching numbers into his phone, and Margaret was collapsed on the floor, wailing. No, I said. I want to see this through. I walked back into the dining room. Sarah was still sitting there, her face pale as a ghost. She looked at me, then at the empty seat where Owen had been sitting. What have you done? She whispered. I picked up Owen's plate of lamb and dumped it into the trash. I am finishing my dinner, I said. The silence in the Whitmore house after the sirens faded was more deafening than the screaming had been. Richard was in his study. The door slammed shut, likely calling every favor he thought he was owed. Margaret had moved from the floor to the sofa, her pearls now a tangled mess as she rocked back and forth. You ruined him, she whispered as I walked back into the living room. You knew that cabin was some government thing, and you let him sell it. You let your own husband walk into a trap. I sat down in the armchair opposite her. I felt a strange sense of exhaustion, but it was light, like a fever breaking. No, Margaret, I told him. I left it in writing. I put it in a yellow folder and told him it was for emergencies only. He decided that stealing from me was an emergency. He was trying to help the family. Margaret snapped, her grief turning back into the familiar venom. He was going to invest that money. He was going to make sure we were all taken care of. You were just sitting on that land like a selfish child. He stole $60,000 from a federal contractor, I said. He forged government documents. He is not a hero, Margaret. He is a thief who was not as smart as he thought he was. The door to the study opened, and Richard walked out. His face was a deep, unhealthy shade of purple. My lawyer is meeting him at the federal building. He says this is a gross overreach. He says the government cannot claim a private cabin is a security asset just because you work for some consulting firm. Your lawyer is wrong, I said. The RACHA contract is part of the National Defense Satellite Network. My property was vetted because I work with encrypted data from my home office. It is not an overreach. It is the law. Richard pointed a trembling finger at me. When Owen gets out, and he will get out, you are going to regret this. We will strip you of everything. That house, your car, every cent you think you earned while Owen was supporting you. Owen has not supported me in 3 years, Richard, I said, standing up. My salary has been double his since 2023. I paid the mortgage. I paid for the vacations. I even paid for that BMW he is so proud of. That is a lie, Margaret screamed. Owen is the provider. I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of bank statements I had printed before leaving Singapore. I had known this moment was coming. Maybe not the arrest, but the reckoning. Here, I said, tossing them onto the coffee table. These are the records for our joint account. Look at the deposits. Look at the names on the checks. Owen has been siphoning money for months. He was not investing it. He was paying off credit cards I did not know existed. Richard picked up the papers. He scanned them, his eyes darting back and forth. His shoulders slumped. He saw the truth in black and white. Owen had not been the successful businessman they had built their family identity around. He was a man drowning in debt, using my hard work to keep his head above water. And Mason? I asked, looking toward the dining room where Mason was trying to comfort a shivering Sarah. That $20,000 he borrowed last year for the shipping business? That came out of my retirement fund. Owen forged my signature for that too. Mason looked up, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. I didn't know Violet. He told me it was a gift. He told me you wanted to help. He told you what you wanted to hear, I said. Just like he told me he loved me while he was planning to sell my sanctuary behind my back. I walked to the hallway and picked up my suitcase. I did not want to stay in this house another second. The air felt poisoned by decades of lies and entitlement. Where are you going? Margaret asked, her voice small and cracked. I'm going to my house, I said, and then I'm calling a divorce lawyer. I walked out the front door and did not look back. I drove through the quiet suburban streets, the heater in my car blasting against the chill. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw the lights were on. My heart skipped. Owen was in jail. Who was in my house? I grabbed my heavy flashlight from the glove box and walked to the front door. I unlocked it quietly, my pulse thudding in my ears. The house smelled of expensive perfume and something cooking in the kitchen. I walked into the living room and stopped dead. The blue sofa I had chosen with such care was gone. In its place was a massive, expensive-looking leather sectional. The walls, which had been covered in my travel photos, were now bare, except for 2 large abstract paintings that looked like something Margaret would pick out. I moved toward the kitchen. Standing at the stove, wearing one of my aprons, was a woman I had never seen before. She was young, maybe 25, with perfectly blonde hair and a smile that vanished the moment she saw me. Who the hell are you? I asked. She gripped the handle of the pan, her eyes wide with terror. I am Chloe, she whispered. Owen told me the house was empty. He said his ex-wife had moved to Singapore permanently. I looked at the counter. There were 2 wine glasses and a bottle of the same expensive wine Owen had served at dinner. Ex-wife? I said, my voice dangerously low. He said the divorce was finalized in August, she said, her voice trembling. He sold me the cabin so I could have a place to stay while we renovated this house. My world tilted. He did not just sell the cabin to a stranger. He sold it to his mistress. The kitchen felt like it was shrinking. I looked at this woman, Chloe, who was wearing my apron and standing in my kitchen, and realized the $60,000 Owen had bragged about was only the tip of the iceberg. You bought the cabin? I asked, my voice steady, only because I was too shocked to scream. Yes, she said, slowly stepping away from the stove. We closed the deal 6 weeks ago. I gave him the money from my inheritance. He said it was a private sale to avoid the fees. He showed me the deed with your signature. I leaned against the counter, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. He didn't just steal my property. He used it to fund a new life with someone else while I was working 16-hour days in Singapore to pay for the roof over his head. How much did you give him, Chloe? She swallowed hard. $60,000 for the cabin and another $40,000 for the renovations here. He said he wanted the house to be perfect for when I moved in. $100,000. He had stolen $100,000 from this girl. He had sold her a cabin he didn't own and promised her a house that belonged to the wife he told her was gone. Owen was arrested an hour ago, I said. Chloe's eyes went wide. For what? For everything, I said. For forging my name on that deed, for selling property that is under federal protection, and likely for grand larceny regarding your $100,000. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her face going ashen. But he said he loved me. He said he was trapped in a marriage with a woman who only cared about her career. He was trapped in a lifestyle he couldn't afford. I corrected her. And you were his latest source of income. I walked to the living room and looked at the leather sofa. $40,000 of her money had gone into this. The house I had built, the life I had curated, had been gutted and replaced with a fraud's version of luxury. I heard the front door open. I expected a lawyer or perhaps another agent. Instead, it was Mason. He looked frantic, his tie undone, and his face streaked with sweat. Violet, you have to help me. He stopped when he saw Chloe. Who is this? This is Owen's other victim, I said. Why are you here, Mason? He didn't look at Chloe. He looked at me, his eyes darting around the room. The bank called. They are freezing the joint accounts. My shipping company. The $20,000 Owen gave me. The feds are saying it's tainted funds. They are going to seize my equipment. I felt a cold surge of satisfaction. Good. Violet, please. If I lose that equipment, I am ruined. I have contracts. I have employees. You have the money from Singapore. Just give me a loan to cover the seizure. I'll pay you back, I swear. I walked over to Mason. I was half a head shorter than him, but in that moment, I felt like a giant. You came here to my house after watching your brother get arrested for stealing from me to ask me for more money? He was just trying to help, Mason cried. We are family. We were never family, Mason, I said. I was an ATM with a wedding ring. I pointed to the door. Get out. Violet, don't do this, he pleaded. Mom is a wreck. Dad is going to have a heart attack. If you don't help us, the whole family collapses. Then let it collapse, I said. I want to watch the dust settle. I pushed him toward the door. He tried to resist, but the look in my eyes must have been enough. He stumbled out onto the porch, shouting about how selfish I was, how I was destroying a good man's life. I slammed the door and locked it. I turned to Chloe, who was still sitting at the kitchen table, crying silently. You need to call a lawyer, I told her, and you need to leave my house. Where am I supposed to go? She sobbed. I sold my apartment. I put everything into that cabin. I felt a twinge of pity, but it was buried under miles of my own pain. That is not my problem, Chloe, but I suggest you go to the police station. Tell them about the $100,000. It might be the only way you get any of it back. She nodded, grabbed her purse, and fled. I was alone. The house was quiet, filled with furniture that wasn't mine and memories that turned out to be lies. I walked upstairs to my bedroom. Owen's clothes were still in the closet. His expensive suits, his silk ties, all bought with my money. I grabbed a trash bag and started ripping them off the hangers. I was halfway through the closet when my phone rang. It was Agent Reeves. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm calling with an update. We've just finished the initial interview with your husband. How did it go? I asked, shoving a pair of Italian shoes into the bag. He's not just talking about the cabin, Reeves said. Her voice sounded tight. He's trying to cut a deal. He's claiming that you were the one who orchestrated the sale. He's saying you told him to forge the signature so you could claim the insurance money later. I stopped. My hand froze on a silk tie. He's blaming me? He's doing more than that, Reeves said. He's provided us with a series of emails from your account, giving him instructions on how to sell the property and where to hide the money. I stared at the wall. I hadn't sent any emails. Reeves continued, her voice dropping. Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to listen to me carefully. Do not leave your house. We are sending a tech team over right now. Why? I whispered. Because the emails were sent from your home IP address while you were in Singapore. Someone has been using your computer to frame you for federal crimes. I looked at the desk in the corner of the room. My laptop was sitting there, glowing in the dark, and the door to my bedroom, which I had locked, slowly began to creak open. The bedroom door continued its slow, agonizing crawl inward. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I clutched the heavy flashlight, my knuckles white, staring at the dark gap of the hallway. I expected Owen, somehow escaped, or Mason, fueled by desperation. Instead, a figure stepped into the light that was far smaller and more terrifying in its familiarity. Margaret stood there, her face no longer twisted in grief, but set in a mask of cold, calculating fury. She held a key to our house, the spare I didn't know Owen had given her. In her other hand, she carried my old tablet, the screen still lit up with the login for my professional email. You always were too smart for your own good, Violet, Margaret said, her voice devoid of the fake maternal warmth she had used for 6 years. I backed away toward the window, the cold glass pressing into my spine. You were the one, I whispered. You sent those emails from my computer. Margaret stepped into the room, tossing the tablet onto the bed as if it were trash. Owen is weak, she spat, her eyes darting to the trash bag of clothes. He was drowning, and you were sitting on a fortune in that cabin. I told him how to do it. I showed him how to practice your handwriting from the old cards you sent us. But the emails, I said, my voice shaking. You framed me for a federal crime. I did what was necessary for my son, Margaret replied, taking another step forward. If the feds believe you were in on it, Owen gets a lighter sentence. He becomes a victim of your ambition, and that $60,000 stays in our family. I looked at the tablet. She had been coming into my house while I was in Singapore, using my home network to create a digital paper trail of my own destruction. It was a perfect trap. You think they won't find out? I asked. Agent Reeves is a professional. They'll see the login times don't match my travel records. Margaret smiled, a thin, jagged line. Oh, I made sure the logins happened while you were active on your work VPN in Singapore. It looks like you were multitasking, dear. A little side business to fund your independent life. Outside, the distant wail of a siren began to grow. Margaret's head snapped toward the window. Her composure cracked for a split second, her hand going to her pearls. They're coming for you, Margaret, I said, stepping toward her. I'm on the phone with Agent Reeves right now. I held up my phone, the screen showing the active call. I hadn't hung up when the door opened. Margaret's face transformed into something feral. She lunged for the phone, her manicured nails clawing at my arm. We struggled in the center of the room, the woman who had spent years belittling me, now reduced to a physical brawl to hide her tracks. I pushed her back, my strength fueled by 6 years of suppressed rage. She tripped over the trash bag of Owen's suits and fell hard against the dresser. The perfume bottle I didn't recognize, the one that belonged to Chloe, shattered on the floor, filling the room with a cloying, sickly sweet scent. The front door burst open downstairs. Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs, the same disciplined rhythm I had heard at the Whitmore estate. Federal agents, stay where you are. Agent Reeves led the charge into the bedroom, her weapon drawn but lowered as she took in the scene. Margaret was on the floor, gasping for air, surrounded by the broken glass of a mistress's perfume and the digital evidence of her own betrayal. I found the tablet, Agent, I said, my voice trembling but clear. She just confessed to everything. Reeves looked at Margaret, then at the tablet on the bed. One of the technicians behind her stepped forward, bagging the device in an electrostatic sleeve. Margaret Whitmore, Reeves said, her voice echoing in the small room. You are under arrest for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and framing a federal witness. As they pulled Margaret to her feet, she didn't look at the agents. She looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred that finally felt honest. You were never one of us, she hissed. I watched them lead her out of my bedroom, past the leather sectional that wasn't mine, and out into the night. I stood at the top of the stairs, breathing in the cold air rushing in from the open front door. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from my bank. The joint account had just been drained of the final $12,500. I stared at the screen, the numbers $12,500 blurring before my eyes. The account was supposed to be frozen. Agent Reeves had told me the feds were locking everything down, but the notification was clear. A wire transfer had been initiated 3 minutes ago, just as Margaret was being put into the back of a squad car. Agent Reeves, I shouted, running down the stairs. Someone just moved the money. Reeves stopped at the front door, her radio already in her hand. Which account? The joint savings, I said, showing her the phone. $12,500. It's the last of my bonus from Singapore. Reeves barked orders into the radio, calling the bank's fraud department and the cyber crimes unit. Who else has the password, Violet? Owen is in a cell. Margaret is in cuffs. Mason, I whispered. I remembered him standing in my kitchen just an hour ago, begging for a loan to save his equipment. He hadn't just been begging, he had been scouting. He must have seen the login info on the kitchen counter or used a saved password on the laptop Owen had given him. We tracked the IP address of the transfer, Reeves said 10 minutes later. It didn't come from a house. It came from a mobile hotspot at the Detroit Metropolitan Airport. He's running, I said. The drive to the airport felt like a blur of neon lights and adrenaline. Reeves drove the lead SUV, her sirens silent to avoid tipping him off. I sat in the back, my hands folded in my lap, thinking about how Mason had always been the one the family celebrated for his financial acumen whenever he won $50 on a lottery ticket. Now, he was trying to flee the country with $12,500 of my stolen labor. We arrived at the international terminal at midnight. The building was a cavern of glass and steel, echoing with the robotic voices of flight announcements. Reeves and her team moved through the crowd with surgical precision, their eyes scanning the faces of travelers. There, I pointed. Near the gate for a flight to Cabo was Mason. He wasn't wearing his suit anymore. He was in a hoodie and jeans, clutching a carry-on bag like it was a life preserver. Sarah was beside him, looking frantic, her eyes darting toward every person in a dark coat. Mason Whitmore! Reeves's voice boomed across the terminal. Mason bolted. He didn't even look back at Sarah. He ran toward the security checkpoint, shoving past an elderly couple and nearly knocking over a flight attendant. But he didn't realize that 2 other agents had already circled around the boarding area. They tackled him near the duty-free shop. A display of expensive cognac shattered as they went down, the smell of alcohol flooding the terminal. It was a messy, pathetic end for the man who thought he was too clever for the rules. As they pulled him up, his carry-on bag fell open. A stack of cash fell out. Not just my $12,500, but another $30,000 in banded bills. "Where did you get that, Mason?" Reeves asked, her foot on the strap of his bag. "It's mine!" Mason screamed, his face pressed against the cold tile. "Owen gave it to me. It's family money." "It's evidence," Reeves corrected him. I walked up to him as they were clicking the cuffs into place. Sarah was standing a few feet away, her hands over her mouth, realizing that her ticket to a luxury life was currently being read his Miranda rights. "I hope the $12,500 was worth it, Mason," I said, "because now you're not just a witness. You're an accomplice." "Violet, please," he sobbed. "I didn't know about the cabin. I just needed to save my business." "You didn't have a business, Mason," I said. "You had a fantasy funded by your brother's theft." As they led him away, I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a new email. Not from Margaret and not from the bank. It was from a law firm in Singapore I had consulted with months ago. The subject line read, "Finalization of personal trust and asset shielding." I opened it. The document inside confirmed that before I had even left for my trip, I had moved the title of the cabin into a blind trust. Owen's sale to Chloe hadn't just been fraudulent. It had been legally impossible from the start. I had known they would try something. I just hadn't realized how far they would fall. The fallout from the Whitmore collapse was a slow-motion car crash that the entire city seemed to watch with bated breath. Within a week, the story of the suburban scandal had hit the front page of the digital news. The image of Owen in handcuffs, followed by his mother and brother, became a symbol of the rot hiding behind manicured lawns and country club memberships. I sat in the office of my new attorney, Carolyn Foster, a woman who looked like she could dismantle a skyscraper with a single look. "The federal government has completed its audit," Carolyn said, sliding a thick file across the desk. "Owen is facing 10 to 15 years for the federal charges alone. Margaret is looking at 5 for the evidence, tampering, and framing. And Mason? He's already started talking." "He flipped?" I asked, not surprised in the least. "Like a pancake," Carolyn said with a grim smile. "He's given them every detail of the family meetings where they discussed your wasteful spending and how to reclaim your earnings. He's even admitted that Richard knew about the forgery from day one." I looked out the window at the Detroit skyline. Richard, the man who had lectured me on transparency and trust, was now being investigated for tax evasion and conspiracy. The house I had lived in for 6 years was being put up for sale to cover the restitution Owen owed to the buyers and to Chloe. "What about Chloe?" I asked. "She's suing the estate," Carolyn replied. "But since you moved the property into a trust before the sale, the title remains yours. The government has already cleared the fraudulent transfer from the federal database." I felt a weight lift off my chest. The cabin was mine. Truly mine. The divorce was finalized in record time. Because of the criminal nature of Owen's actions, the judge awarded me 100% of the remaining marital assets. I didn't want the furniture or the BMW. I sold it all. I took the money and set up a scholarship fund for women entering the international compliance field, women who would learn to spot people like Owen before they could do any damage. A month later, I stood in the hallway of my old house for the last time. The leather sectional was gone, hauled away by movers. The abstract paintings were on the floor, waiting for the new owners to decide if they were art or trash. I found one thing Owen had missed. Tucked behind the radiator in the hallway was a small, dusty photo. It was from our first year of marriage. We were standing in front of a fountain, and Owen was looking at the camera with that same practiced smile. I was looking at him, hoping that the man I had married actually existed. I didn't tear it up. I just left it on the counter for the realtor to find. I drove north, the city falling away in my rearview mirror. The pines began to thicken, their scent filling the car as I rolled down the windows. When I reached the dirt road to the cabin, I saw a familiar vehicle parked near the gate. Agent Catherine Reeves was leaning against her car, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. "I thought you might be heading up here today," she said, handing me a cup. I took a sip. It was perfect. Oat milk, no sugar. "We officially closed the file on Margaret this morning," Reeves said, looking out at the pond. "She took a plea deal. She'll serve 3 years. Owen is going away for the full decade. He still insists he was the one who was wronged. He'll have plenty of time to explain that to his cellmates," I said. Reeves nodded, then looked at me with a professional curiosity. "You knew they'd try to sell it, didn't you? That's why you put it in the trust." I looked at the cabin, its cedar siding glowing in the afternoon light. I knew Owen didn't see me as a person. He saw me as an extension of his own needs. And when people see you that way, they think they have a right to everything you touch. I didn't know how he'd do it, but I knew he'd try. I walked up the steps to the deck. The wood felt solid under my feet. No more creaks, no more tilted boards. I unlocked the door with the new deadbolt and stepped inside. The silence was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. 1 year later, the sunrise through the pines was exactly as Ruth Morrison had described it, better than church. I sat on the wraparound deck, my laptop open, finishing a compliance report for a firm in Tokyo. My business had exploded. It turns out that being the woman who took down a family of fraudsters is a great marketing tool in the world of corporate ethics. The cabin was no longer just a weekend retreat. It was my headquarters. I had installed a high-speed satellite uplink and a solar array that kept me completely off the grid when I wanted to be. I received a letter in the mail that morning. It was from a federal prison in Ohio. I didn't open it. I knew what it would say. Owen had been writing once a month, his tone shifting from rage to bargaining to a desperate kind of nostalgia. He wanted me to visit. He wanted me to help him with his appeal. He still didn't understand that the woman he was writing to didn't exist anymore, the one who would have sacrificed her own peace to fix his mistakes. I walked down to the edge of the pond. The water was like a mirror, reflecting the blue of the sky and the dark green of the trees. I thought about the night of the dinner, the smell of the roast lamb, and the sound of Owen's fork against the crystal. It felt like a lifetime ago. I saw a flash of white hair near the tree line. Ruth Morrison was walking toward me, her flannel shirt bright against the shadows. She still lived a few miles down the road, and we had become close over the last 12 months. "How is the medicine working, Violet?" she asked, leaning on her walking stick. I looked at the cabin, then back at the water. "It's working perfectly, Ruth." She nodded, a knowing smile on her weathered face. Some people think a house is just wood and nails, but the right house, it can hold you together when the rest of the world is trying to pull you apart. She handed me a small basket of tomatoes from her garden. "I heard the family is officially out of the big house in the suburbs." "Yes," I said. "It was sold at auction yesterday." "Good," Ruth said. "Greed is a hungry ghost. It'll eat the house and the people inside if you let it." She headed back toward the trail, leaving me with the silence and the tomatoes. I walked back up to the deck and looked at my phone. There was a message from Agent Reeves. "Just thought you'd like to know. Mason's shipping company equipment was sold to a legitimate startup today. The proceeds went into the restitution fund. You should see a deposit for your $12,500 by Friday." I smiled and put the phone down. I didn't need the $12,500 anymore, but it was nice to have the numbers match the truth. I spent the rest of the afternoon working. The only sound, the occasional bird call or the wind through the needles. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the pond in shades of orange and violet, I poured myself a glass of wine, a simple bottle from the local grocery store. I raised the glass to the trees. I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I was the architect of it. And for the first time in my life, the foundations were built on solid ground. I walked inside, locked the door, and let the forest keep my secrets. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.